Hello, everyone. Otto Excelsior here of navicavada.org. You might know me and my co-pilot and electronics warfare officer, Roger Hanson, for our automatic pilot show. We're doing a little something different today, though. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about what I like to call nuts and bolts Buddhism, Buddhism basics, something I always like to get back to. And we're going to be talking with Robert Hanson, who is the other half of the Brothers Hanson, who are responsible for some of the most amazing stuff I've ever seen on the internet. And of course, we also have Roger with us as well. Gentlemen, I'm very glad to have you with me today.
Glad to be
Welcome.
here.
Cool. Cool. Now, Robert, I'm doing this mainly because you were interested in Buddhism and you kind of wanted to know about where it came from and basically what it is, right?
Yeah, to have more of a wide variety of everything about it. The good, where did it start? The branch offs of of it.
Well, I think that I can only talk out of my own knowledge of Buddhism.
Oh yeah,
So I would be happy to talk about what I know and my own understanding. I should start by mentioning that there are a lot of different things out there called Buddhism. And we've all heard a lot of stuff called Buddhism, and yeah, it's certainly necessarily so, rightly so. But it's sort of like saying that someone is a Christian, but then you realize you have people that are Roman Catholic, Lutheran, Episcopal, Eastern Orthodox. So there's a lot of different ways to be a Christian, just like there's a lot of different ways to be a Buddhist. So, but I'm going to talk about my own Buddhism, which is based on Theravada Buddhism. And Theravada means the way of the old ones, and it is the oldest tradition that we have about the Buddha, the oldest writings we have. So this is a big question. What is Buddhism, right? And I've been thinking about this for a few days now, and I think we'll talk a little bit about who the Buddha was. Uh, the Buddha was not born the Buddha. Okay, Buddha means somebody who is awake. That's what the Buddha means. Buddha means the awake, the guy who's awake, the awakened one. Before he was the Buddha, he was just some guy. And the technical term is bodhisattva or bodhisattva, you might have heard. That's another way to say it. And that means a pre-Buddha, somebody that's going to be a Buddha down the line. So when his name was Gautama Siddhartha. And so when Gautama was born, this is the story. His father, who was a prince, a military man, he was part of the ruling military caste in India. He consulted astrologers, and you always consult an astrologer. You know, what is my son's life going to be? And the astrologer cast his horoscope, and he said, "Well, your son Gautama is either going to be a world teacher, or he's going to be a world conqueror." I think the term was Chakravartin, which means a wheel-turning monarch. In other words, he's going to be this great military and political overlord, or he's going to be this amazing spiritual teacher. Well, now his father was already a military man, and he obviously wanted his son to be a general and a conqueror and stuff. So he says, well, I'm going to addict my son to all the worldly pleasures in life. So he'll never think about that holy stuff and the spiritual teachings and stuff. So the Buddha grew up with amazing wealth, amazing luxury, right? Hot and cold running dancing girls, right? He had palaces for every season of the year. He was married to, I believe he had 4 wives. You'd have to check. Each wife had her own palace. You know, this is like really Elon Musk levels of wealth. Well, maybe not quite Elon, but yeah, very, very, very well off. And so he always grew up surrounded by wonderful food. All things were smooth for him. You know, never any lumps in the bed. His attendants were always healthy and young. The only old person he ever saw was his own father, who, although he was gray-haired, he was still a stalwart, strong guy in his early 50s or mid 50s even. And so he's like tooling along, thinking, this is great. And one day he's going out with for a chariot ride with his charioteer, and they're bopping along, and he sees this person by the side of the road, and he's like gray haired like his dad, but he's all wrinkled, right? And he can barely stand upright. He's got a stick, and he's got a younger man helping him along, and he can barely move. And the Buddha had never seen anything like this. This guy's obviously suffering. He can barely walk. So it's because of his charioteer. What happened to that guy? The charioteer, well, he got old. The Buddha said, old? The only other person with gray hair I ever saw was my dad. He's in good shape. He can beat me at arm wrestling. It's like, oh, no. This is what happens to everyone. Everybody gets old. And they get like that. And the Buddha goes, wow. He had no idea. So he's thinking about this. So he goes back to the palace. Goes out on another chariot trip. They're tooling along, and he sees somebody out in front of their house, which is what they used to do, who was very ill. And he was sitting on a shaded area, and he had his friends trying to give him medicine. He was like throwing up, and he was like cramped, and he was in like a lot of pain. The Buddha never seen anything like, like a lot of young people. He'd never had a sick day in his life, past maybe the sniffles. He was like, what's happening to that guy? Like, oh, he's sick. Now, again, the Buddha's father never allowed sick people in his son's presence. The minute anyone started getting old, they were like farmed off. They always had young servants. Everything was always happy there. So he's like, sick? What's that? It's like, oh, well, you throw up, your gut gets twisted up. If you have dysentery, you just can't stop going to the vet. All kinds of things can happen to you. It's like everybody gets sick. The Buddha's like, whoa, I didn't know that. So again, he wasn't happy about it, but he's thinking about it. Yeah, I think you guys might see where this is going already. So they go out again for a little chariot ride. They come across a funeral procession, right? They're carrying a body to go be burned. And they fall in with a procession, and there's a dead body, and they're putting it on the pyre. And Buddha says, why are they burning that guy? Oh, he's dead. Dead? What's that? Oh, you stop breathing, your heart stops, you start rotting if you don't get burnt real quick. And the Buddha had never heard of this, so he was like, oh my goodness, this is horrible. So they get back to the palace, and he's kind of worked up about this. He's going to get older, he's going to age, he's going to get sick, he's going to die, even him, even the young prince that has every wish granted, that has all this immense power. He can just wave his hand, he can have any food he wants, any woman he wants, and he can go out for a horse ride. So he's like worried about this. But then he decides he's going to go out for another chariot trip. So they go out, and they're going along the road, and there's another guy he sees by the side of the road, and this is an older man, but he's standing firm. And he has very few things. He's wearing poor robes, and he just has a staff and a little satchel, and he seems very calm, and he's just traveling along. And the Buddha says, who's that guy? He seems pretty cool. And the charioteer says, oh, well, that's an ascetic. That's a mystic. Well, what's he do? He said, well, he's decided to get beyond all the illusions of this world. And the Buddha said, that's what I want to do. So you see, the father's work to try to make his son reject a spiritual path actually brought him to the spiritual path. And this is like an old motif in folklore, folk tales. So this might be just a kind of a folk tale thing, but it gives you an idea. So the Buddha was a guy who discovered that there's a lot of very unpleasant things in the world that he was completely kept in ignorant of. And in a sense, we're sort of like that, because we are all going to age. And all of us sitting here have aged quite a bit. Me not least of all, right? And we're all going to get ill, and we've all been ill. And unfortunately, we're all going to die. And these are things that most people ignore. They live as if none of this is going to happen. So they're kind of like in the state the Buddha was in, just tooling along completely unconscious of these things. So the Buddha decided he had to do something about this. He really had to face it, look at it, and figure out how he could cope with it. And so he left home and began studying with spiritual teachers. And he eventually became the Buddha, which means the awakened one. And now there's a million things I could talk about, but I just want to say something about that title, Awakened One. Okay? Because this, in a lot of ways, is the heart of what Buddhists are trying to do, or part of it, part of the technique, right? when we live in our life, okay, you and I and everybody else we know, most of the time we're not thinking about what we're doing. We're in our heads. We're thinking about what someone said to us. We're thinking about what we said to someone else. We're thinking about something we lost. We're thinking about something we might want. We're not really here a lot of the time. So we're all kind of like going around sleepwalking. And our mind, anything that comes to us gets filtered through our mind. So if we have a mind that's depressed, everything's going to be horrible. If we have a mind that's joyous, everything's going to be joyous. Hooray, right? So it has nothing to do with what's actually going on. It has to do with your own mind. So we spend all this time thinking these thoughts and living in these thoughts. And in Buddhism, they call this a becoming, right? You take on an identity in a world of experience in your head. And again, when I talk about this, you have to say more things. What happens is, well, put it this way. The Buddha was talking about, and the Buddha was said that he taught two things, right? Suffering and the end of suffering. Because he saw all this death happening and all this sickness and aging, and he was disturbed by it. He was suffering, not in pain. You know, you stub your toe, that's pain. But you suffer when you think, damn, I should not have stubbed my toe, right? That's the mental anguish. So he, by looking, discovered that you suffer because you crave something. You crave a sandwich, right? And then you cling to the idea of having a sandwich. You cling to that, right? And if you don't have a sandwich, you're miserable. Because I don't have a sandwich. I'm thinking about the sandwich. Where's my sandwich? I want a bloody sandwich, right? And you don't have one. This is suffering caused by clinging to the idea of a sandwich. To get out of the suffering, you just stop clinging to the idea of a sandwich. You say, well, I don't have a sandwich, but that's okay. I don't care. And suddenly you're not suffering from it anymore, right? And even if you get the sandwich, and this is the tricky part, right? Say you're craving a sandwich, right? You're clinging to the idea of a sandwich. So you go and you make a sandwich, right? You solve the problem. Well, not really, because you eat the sandwich. Now notice, first of all, that eating the sandwich probably takes less than 5 minutes, right? You spent hours thinking about having the sandwich. Most of your time with the sandwich is spent just thinking about it. The sandwich itself, it's gone. You eat it in 5 minutes and suddenly you don't have a sandwich anymore. And as time goes on, the sandwich goes away. And the next day we know what happens to the sandwich, right? We know what the sandwich has turned into. So this pleasure, this thing that you cling to, goes away. And everything we cling to goes away, including the people around us go away. So this is going to cause us to suffer if we cling to them. Now, this sometimes gets people upset about Buddhism because, and I've had this conversation with people, in order to understand why you're suffering, right? In order to understand the clinging and the craving, you have to comprehend what's going on. You have to look at your suffering very closely and see that it's there. And like I said at the beginning, most people ignore this. So one of the first things that a Buddhist does is, after, receiving precepts or undertaking to keep precepts, is you have 5 things you're supposed to think about every day. And one is the discovery of the Buddha, that you are going to age. That's normal, part of the deal. You're born, you're going to age. You're going to get sick. It's normal. It's part of the deal. You can't help it. You're going to get sick sometime or other. And yes, you are going to die. Unfortunately, we're all going to die. And that's part of the deal. You can't help that. And then the further remembrance is that you will be separated from things, from all that you hold dear.